Scott is an author of a children's book called Wise for Yooper, and he is the host and founder of the Chat It Up podcast. If you're not familiar, you should be. And I have no idea if this is actually correct, but I think it's one of the longest running like UP based podcasts. Do you know if that's true?
It definitely is the longest running.
Okay.
The earliest iterations of a UP podcast that I could find were Dan Cornyn had a podcast, and he's a new. I know he's newly one of your board members. He had UP the podcast. I think back around like 2010. Podcasting was kind of in its infancy at that time. The other kind of prolific podcast, I guess, for lack of a better word, that I'm aware of, back around 2016, there was a podcast called the North Coast Post podcast. That ran for, I want to say, like 7 or 8 episodes, and that was it. So as far as like duration, as far as how long I've been doing this, I would say I'm probably the longest running for sure. But definitely not the first. There were definitely a few that came before me.
Yeah, I think there are a lot that have, like 1 to 4 episodes and then they kind
Mhm.
of trailed off. But
Yep.
you've been consistent for the last 2, 3 years,
Yep.
and
Since 2017.
awesome. So
Yeah.
those are, I mean, I know that there it may go different places. This event is a conversational tone,
Hmm.
so that's why we keep it small. For the most part, I think we're, kind of keeping it in the podcasting and book realm. If it goes
Yep.
off other directions, that's amazing. But please, if you have questions, like now's the time. It's pretty cool to have someone who's both published a book that's made it now to Singapore or Philippines,
Yeah.
and to Boston, such exotic locales, and to have a long running podcast. So get your questions answered. Scott, if
Yeah.
you want to, kind of tee up, I know you've got some stuff prepared, and we'll just let it flow organically from there.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for inviting me to do this. It's a bit surreal, kind of full circle. Actually, I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing I put on my 40 below shirt today. Um, for those of you that have been around long enough, you know that Connect Marquette used to be 40 below. So I'm one of the OG members from back in the day. I was on the board for 2 years. So, like I said, it's a bit surreal to be uh, asked to talk with you guys, um, which um, the other cool part about it is Connect Marquette also plays a pretty big role in my story, which you'll kind of hear along the way. Um, so really the journey for this book and also the podcast starts back in 2007. Um, I was at Central Michigan University. I was getting my degree in elementary education. And one of my courses, we had an assignment to come up with a children's book. And the first place that my brain went was the UP. I enjoyed my time down in Mount Pleasant, downstate, but I found myself coming back home to the UP whenever I could. And it really just started from there. I knew that I wanted the book to rhyme, and it almost became a game to try and figure out fun UP centric stuff and making it all rhyme and kind of fit together. Um, at the time, I think the requirement for the book was only like 20 pages. So I did not finish the book. I did not do a full ABC book the first time I did it. I basically just did what the assignment acquired of me. But the response that I got from my class and then from showing it from my family and friends was really kind of the catalyst, to kind of at least put the bug in the back of my brain of that I might have something unique. But really at the time, um, I didn't do anything with the book or the idea. I was just a broke college kid, so I didn't really have the means. It was really kind of on the back burner. The last thing I was thinking about was trying to create something out of this. Um, so to fast forward a little bit, basically, things really kind of got off the ground with making this a reality around 2010. Um, a big kind of life moment that happened in 2010 was the birth of my niece. She was a micro preemie, so she was born at only 25 weeks along. So she was in the NICU for 100 and I want to say 14 days. So it was a pretty big life event for our family, and that kind of like lighted the fire underneath me. It really kind of opened my eyes to, life is too short, and a lot can happen. So right around that time is when I filed for the copyright for the book. Um, and that was a lot of just researching on Google as to how to do that because I didn't know anybody that had copywritten anything before. So it was just a lot of Google searches. Um, you have to then fill out an application and pay a fee. I can't even remember how much the fee was. I want to say it was like $25. But you submit this fee to the copyright office. It's all done digitally these days, and they just review it. If you have to make any changes or fix anything or clarify anything, they contact you, and then they basically send you a certificate of copyright. Um, so from that point, once I had the copyright, you would think, oh, okay, well, hit the ground running and make this happen. But as the famous saying goes, when you're busy making plans, that's when real life happens. So around that time, I had made it back to the UP, thankfully, and I was teaching at Superior Central, which is out in Eben Junction. If any of you aren't aware of where that is, it's about a half hour kind of southeast of Marquette, very kind of small rural school. So around that time, that's when I really started trying to make the book into a finished product, of physically putting it together. Now, I was doing everything all myself, as far as finding pictures, messing around with clip art. There's services out there that are available where you could pay somebody to do that. I just didn't really have a desire to do that. It was, for whatever reason, my personality is just do it yourself. So that kind of involved royalty free imaging. Obviously, I don't want to, I didn't want to get myself in trouble for using something I didn't have permission to use. Um, the other kind of key point around this time, and it's kind of a recurring theme throughout the journey of the book and the podcast, is hitting speed bumps. It would be easy to paint a rosy picture and say everything went smooth, but it definitely did not. Um, the first kind of speed bump that I hit around 2011, I showed the book and a very early rough copy to some of my fellow coworkers or teachers. The response that I got from them was not great, to say the very least. Um, I At the time, it kind of deterred me a little bit. It definitely kind of took the wind out of my sails. But at the same time, I also kind of appreciated their brutal honesty, because people that aren't maybe necessarily connected to you, like your family or friends, might be a little bit more honest with you than family or friends might be. Um, right around this same time, I also got laid off from my teaching job. So then everything really kind of came to a screeching halt, because paying my bills and putting food on the table kind of takes paramount to this, side project that I was working on. And that's actually really where Connect Marquette comes into play here. So summer of 2011, I had gotten laid off from my teaching job and I did not get called back. I knew that I wanted to stay in Marquette County, but I knew that I needed to figure out a way to make that happen. And it became increasingly more apparent to me that working in the world of education was going to be difficult to make that happen. Especially, this was also kind of right on the end of the big recession. Things weren't all that great yet in 2011. So I was working at Gander Mountain, and just working part time and kind of trying to figure out what my next move would be. Now, when I first moved up to Marquette in 2009, 2010-ish, I got involved in Connect Marquette right away. Um, I was really interested in the networking side of things because, as I'm sure some of you know, if you're not from Marquette, it's very difficult to kind of break in, so to speak. So many people have known each other for years and years and years, or maybe they grew up together. Communities are tight knit, and so it's kind of hard to break into that friend circle. I had a handful of people that I knew that were going to school at Northern at the time, but I didn't really know very many people within, the working world that were networking and kind of on a similar path as me. So at the time, I was heavily involved with Connect Marquette, and I started to kind of put the word out there that I was looking to make a career change if I possibly could. One of the people that was on the board of Connect Marquette at that time is a woman by the name of Heather Mosier. Some of you may know Heather, some of you may not. Now, Heather, her and I grew up in Kingsford, a couple of blocks from each other. She went to school at Northern. She was a year older than me in school, and I went to Central. So when we went to college, we never saw each other, really spoke. But when I moved back to Marquette and got involved with Connect Marquette, her and I were really able to kind of rekindle that friendship. And so with her knowing that I was looking to make a possible career change, she said, "Hey, we have an opening here at Vast that I think you would be great for if you're really serious about making a career change. You should get me your resume, and I'll get it to the right people to take a look at. But we're looking for somebody long term, so you need to really be serious if this is what you want to do." Um, I really started looking at Vast as a company and their culture and what they represent, and I loved everything about it. So I got my resume to her, and that was really my foot in the door. That was I basically got hired at the beginning of 2012, and I've been at Vast ever since. So I really owe where I'm at today just everything to not only Heather but Connect Marquette, because it would have never ever happened the way it did if I didn't utilize what Connect Marquette can offer. I'll stop here for a second. Does anybody have any questions at this point before I kind of continue on in the journey?
We got our testimonial. That's a wrap, everyone.
uh, all right. Well, I'll just keep blabbing on. If you end up having a question, just wave or something or send me a message and I'll stop because I don't want to feel like I'm blabbering on. Oh, we do have a question. Okay, Joanne, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was curious if you're open to this or mentioning it. What kind of feedback did you get from your fellow teachers?
So
if it was helpful.
The helpful part about it was some of the clip art that I had used was not the greatest. A few of the choices that I had used for some of the letters, they didn't necessarily love or didn't have the best reaction to. And just some minor tweaking of how I worded some things. It was a weird scenario because I don't want to say anything disparaging. The work culture there just wasn't all that great. And so it was tough for me to distinguish what was honest criticism of the work itself and what was maybe more kind of snarky quips, that type of thing.
Oh yeah.
I just to that point had only had a warm reception to showing it to people, and that was really kind of the first time that the reception wasn't all that warm, essentially. So like I said, I kind of had to go through what they told me with a fine-tooth comb and kind of maybe have a little bit of a thicker skin. So while it may not have been the greatest reception, I do appreciate what they did tell me, because I do feel like it helped me in the long run, whether I wanted to hear it or not, or whether it ruffled my feathers or not. But that's a great question, so thank you for asking that.
Yeah,
Antonia.
I'm a
Oh.
writer too, so
Okay.
it is, sometimes it's hard to get feedback, but it can also be helpful with the exception of snarkiness. So
Yes. Yeah.
thank you.
Antonia?
Yeah, I had just a similar thought, but on the other end, what is some of the feedback that you received from the kids, from the students? If you've ever, I know that you had posted a picture, an awesome picture, by the way, of you standing in a gymnasium with like 100 kids or something. That was really cool, by the way. But I'm just curious if you ever got any feedback or got to chat with the kids about what they thought of the book.
Yeah, you get interesting feedback from kids because kids are brutally honest. They don't really have that filter, so they don't really care. They don't realize if they're hurting your feelings or not. Um, it seems like most of the feedback that you get from kids, or at least that I've gotten with reading it to them, is they just want to share their personal experiences. And so that's what I like, and that's kind of the positive feedback I've had from them is after we read through the book, or if they've read it, they mostly want to tell me like, oh, D is for deer. We see deer in my backyard all the time. My grandpa loves to feed them, or we go to camp. They just want to like tell you stories about how the book relates to them. So that's kind of the most fun part. Um, Hands down, the favorite page is H is for Holy Wa. Because when I read the book live with kids, I have them yell that for me to like help me out. And so the fact that they get to like scream at the top of their lungs to help me out, that's like their favorite part. They get real jacked on that. Other than that, the only real kind of like feedback I would get from them is they just might ask me about, well, did you think about using like this for a different letter? Just kind of like suggestions of different things to put in the book. But that's really it. Eric.
Hey, I just had a question about the copyright process.
Yes.
You kind of described it a little bit, but how detailed actually was it? Did you have to have like a full outline, or was it more just like, here's the title?
Yeah. So I'm based on what I remember, I'm assuming it varies depending on what you're submitting a copyright for. As far as a literary piece of work, they wanted it in a PDF style, essentially, is what they wanted, of like as much of the finished product as you have. It's more about your words than it is necessarily like the idea being copyrighted. It's really that you're copywriting like, hey, here's my finished product. If anybody else puts something out with this same name that looks the same, then we've got an issue.
Right on. Thanks.
Yep. Awesome question so far. These are great.
I've got kind of a thread to pull on here because I get the sense that we have a lot of creative people here, and I think there's kind of a point in every creative's journey where you kind of have to like you face that friction of getting feedback, and where you either make the decision to make what other people want you to make, or you make what you want to make, and you deal with the possibility that people may not receive it well. uh, this might get more into, I mean, the podcast is probably you just have a bigger body of work to kind of compare against, but
Right.
I mean, what's been your experience? Like, what are your thoughts there, or what's your experience?
Well, everybody's got an opinion, but very few people, or everybody's got advice they want to give you, but very few people will act on that on their own advice, that type of thing. It's a very thin line of going your own way and being stubborn, and taking that feedback and saying, okay, I can make this better. But in a lot of ways, and Joanne could probably attest to this, being a writer, and really anybody that's a creative could probably attest to this. A lot of times you end up being your own worst critic or your harshest critic. And I can't tell you how many times if I'm working on something, I go back and I change it or I critique it. And it could be the smallest little minute thing, and I would go back and try and tweak and change it. And 99.9% of people would probably just skip over it and not put another thought into it. But I'm such a perfectionist and so hard on myself that it just like I said, I feel like a lot of people that are creatives could relate to that. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but like you said, that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could kind of go down.
So in that sense, like, is there still things that you notice in your book as you're like reading it to kids or and stuff that you like want to change? And
Yeah.
do authors like update their books like that throughout? Do you ever like make changes?
Some authors you might see different editions of books, like a first edition, second edition. You typically won't see major changes. It's usually just kind of small things here or there. It'd be difficult to do with an ABC book because it would be glaringly obvious if I changed something. I've just kind of come to terms and living with the fact that the book just needs to live as it does. But it's funny that you bring that up because it kind of ties into a big Yooper thing, is that I did actually have to make a change to my book with S is for sauna. So if you're not from the UP originally, or I guess whether you are or you aren't, you'll find out really quickly that how you pronounce the word sauna is highly contested. And it's this big deal. If you don't say sauna with a real thick draw on it, some people will correct you. I grew up in the Iron Mountain Kingsford area, which is in the south part of the UP, and I grew up hearing people just say sauna. I didn't hear that real thick kind of Finlander accent, as they call it, the sauna. It's just not how people said it. So not being accustomed to that, when I created the book, if you've read the book, there's like phonetics I put after each word to help kids. I put SAW-NA, sauna, because that's just how I say it. A few months after the book came out, I started getting like, I'll just be frank, I was almost getting like hate mail. I was getting emails from people very angrily like attacking me for this book, or this part of the book, to the point where the book was being sold in some mom and pop shops, and particularly on the west end of the UP, people were returning the book and asking for a refund from these shop owners, that because they were so upset about it. So then the shop owners were coming to me and being like, "Hey, I've had to refund your book to some people." And at first I fought it. I was, in my opinion, how you pronounce a word isn't like, there's way bigger things in the grand scheme of life like to worry about than how you pronounce a specific word. And just because one person says it one way and another person says it a different way, as far as just the pronunciation, it just seems silly to me. But at the end of the day, I just got so sick of dealing with the fallout from it that I did go in and correct it and put SAW-NA. This was probably, I would say, probably 8 months into the book being out, and all of the controversy, if you could even call it that, kind of fizzled away. But that kind of feeds into a lot of what with the podcast and stuff about the UP is so unique in that it's such a big area as far as land wise. People think of the UP as being such a small, like close knit culture, but really each of these different regions of the UP have their own cultures. They have their own words that they use, the way that they pronounce certain words, their traditions. It's much more diverse than I think a lot of people think when you look at it from like a 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes a little bit like because you, like, for instance, with the Chatted Up podcast, your show is kind of regional in the sense, like, when you started it, it might have been with the intent of it being local, but really it's more of a regional approach. If there's a lot of difference between Marquette to Eben Junction to Baraga to Houghton to Escanaba, like those are entirely different places.
Oh, big time. Big time. Um, so before we kind of jump into the podcast, I'll just kind of wrap up like the story of the book, and then we can kind of dig into that a little bit more. So like I said, I got hired at Vast in 2012, early 2012. The beginning of 2013 is when everything really kind of kicked into high gear. And I have my boss, Chris Van Abel at Vast, to thank for that. She was instrumental in me actually finally following through with this. Um, I've already kind of hyped up the culture at Vast. It's unlike any place I've ever worked or experienced as far as the culture and from the top down, there being an investment in the people that work there. Um, I would meet with Chris on a quarterly basis for what we just kind of call check-ins. And we would go through how things were going in the office, but she would also ask, like, how is life in general? Do you have any big stuff going on outside of work, or just how are things at home? That type of thing. And when she found out about my book, she was like gung ho. She's like, you're going to make this happen. And on a quarterly basis, I'm going to check in with you on this. And if you don't get some of the stuff done that we've talked about, I'm going to call you out on it. And it was like, oh crap. Like it was almost kind of like a homework assignment, that type of thing. So that was huge in really kind of making me put boots to the ground and really take off with this. Which kind of led into the next speed bump, which was I met with a local publisher to look at my book and to try and I was trying to see if I could get somebody to publish it for me or if I was going to have to self-publish. The person that had looked at the book from the local publishing company, again, had kind of a lukewarm response. They had seen there was another Yooper ABC book that was out there. It did not look anything like mine. It didn't rhyme, but it was somebody that had self-published it. And I believe actually that publisher was the one that had published the prior ABC book. So I don't know if the lukewarm response was because they already had a book out there that they were trying to sell, or if it was just genuine, they didn't really think I had something. But that, again, kind of took the wind out of my sails a little bit. But really all that did was just kind of push me in the direction of, okay, I'm going to have to do all of this all myself as far as a self-publishing route. From there, again, it comes back to Connect Marquette, believe it or not, because I had the realization that I'm good at certain things, or I know how to do certain things, and there's other stuff I have no clue on how to do. And what I did was I looked to the people that I had gotten to know from Connect Marquette. I used my networking. I basically, networking is you meet all of these people, you develop a relationship. 9 times out of 10, you don't necessarily ever what I call cash in that coin. You don't cash that in and reach out to them and say, hey, I might need something 9 times out of 10. I decided I'm going to look at who I've met through networking that can help me with this. I'm going to cash in those coins. So I reached out to Carolee Swanberg, who was working with LSCP at the time. She really helped me with the business side of it, as far as, okay, registering in, as a DBA in Marquette County, and just the ins and outs of how to do the tax part of it with registering with the state of Michigan, getting your tax license. Because if you're going to sell your book yourself, you have to have a license in order to do that, because you have to be able to charge people sales tax, which you then pay to the state of Michigan. So she really helped me because I had zero clue on the tax side or how to actually really kind of run it like a business. You could go the, make an LLC route. And my advice there would be everybody's situation is different. For me, I knew as a side hustle, the LLC route was just not how I wanted to go. So I just did Shooters Publishing as my DBA, and I just kind of ran everything from that from that standpoint. The other person that I really kind of leaned on was John Spigarelli. Now, John was one of the founders of Connect Marquette, and he and I have a very close relationship to this day because of Connect Marquette. I basically really kind of met him through Connect Marquette, and we started having lunch on a monthly basis, basically, when I was still living in Marquette County, and we've continued that friendship to today. Any of you that might know John, or even if you don't know John, he is incredible. He's an ideas guy. He is one of the best people to talk to bounce an idea off of. He's a realist. He will shoot you straight. But he was kind of a big catalyst for me of making me realize I had a finished product and I was like this close to actually making it a reality, which that this close is always the hardest part. And through talks with him over lunch, he kind of really helped me realize that I had found my own lane. There wasn't other Yooper ABC books out there besides this other one that didn't really have a big imprint. And he was again a really big catalyst for me of putting all of the final pieces together. So from there, I basically, when I decided to self-publish, I made the decision that whatever I did, I knew that online was going to be just as big of a force as selling it in brick and mortar places. Because my thought process was there's a lot of people that move out of the UP or don't live in the UP but are from here. And so the majority of those people, how are they going to get the book? They're going to need to find it online. At the time, there was a company called Create Space that was owned by Amazon that was a one-stop shop to self-publish. You could pay them to, it was almost like a cafeteria plan. You could pay them to do your cover art, you could pay them to do your illustrations, you could pay them to edit, or you could do it all of yourself. And once you basically created it and approved it through their templates, you were instantly on Amazon once they approved it. And so for me, that was huge because I knew that that was going to be a big audience. The other part of that was just, at the time, there were the Book World stores all around the UP. Book World does not exist anymore, but in late 2014, or I should say early 2014, they were still a thing. And I knew that that was like my hub into all of these different major communities around the UP. So I started contacting them about the book, and really that was kind of like my foot in the door in a lot of these communities. From there, I created a Facebook page in early 2015 to kind of drum up like a following or publicity. It kind of went micro viral. It had like 2,000 likes in a very short period of time. The next thing I know, TV6 was calling me for an interview, and everything just kind of snowballed from there. Other than that, I don't want to run out of time here and give enough time to talk about the podcast, but I guess I'll just kind of wrap things up with the book with just saying that, the biggest takeaways that I have from the book is taking your idea and just kind of finding your own lane within that idea. There might be other ideas out there that are similar to yours, but if you have something that you truly realize is unique, you need to find that lane and just run with it. The other big thing is I realized that success is not a straight line. There were so many speed bumps along the way, and I had to pivot and change and move, and kind of, those speed bumps that I talked about, that they're key to anybody's story. That's not unique to me. The other big thing, and probably just as big as the speed bumps, is 99% of people that have an idea won't take it that final 1% and actually make that idea a reality. I cannot tell you how many different times, once I put the book out, somebody would come up to me and say, you know, I've always wanted to write a book or a novel, or I've had this idea forever. You know, this would be really cool, but I just never got around to doing it. And that's the majority of the people that I've come across, that I've talked to, at least as far as like the world of writing and being an author, is so many people have an idea, but they don't follow through and make that a reality. So my other big takeaway from just my book journey is if you have that idea, don't be afraid to be a part of the 1%, because the only way you're going to find out whether it was a good idea or not is if you truly take that leap. And in my opinion, regret of not doing something would be way worse than doing something and maybe it doesn't pan out the way you hoped.
Yeah, 100%. The things you regret are the things you don't do, not the things you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all of this really kind of flows right into the podcast, because so the book came out in June of 2015. From there, you know, it was very successful when it for the first year. And things have kind of slowed down, especially with the book world's closing. It's still sold in quite a few mom and pop shops. This year I hit over 5,000 copies sold, but as things kind of began to slow down, I started kind of thinking, okay, is there something else I want to do? Um, a lot of people have asked, are you going to write another Y is for Yooper book, or do you have any other ideas? And I knew that I didn't want to just be known as like the ABC book guy, because there's more to me just than that one thing. And um, a part of that is during my travels around the UP with the book, I met so many interesting people who had interesting stories. And if you're from the UP, yes, we have within your own community, things are very small and tight knit, but you also kind of start to know people in other communities around the UP. So while they're separate, you know, kind of regions and communities, you do kind of start to get that 6 degrees of separation where you might know someone who knows someone, that type of thing. So I had this idea for a while about maybe doing a podcast, because I'm a big fan of podcasts. I listen to them all the time. And I got to the point where I was worried about having that regret of not doing it. You know, right around 2017, when I really kind of decided to take the leap, my wife Patty, she was a big catalyst as well. She's not from the UP. She's from the St. Clair Shores area, which is down near Detroit. And you know, from me telling her stories or different things just about life up here, or people that I know, she just kind of was like, you know a lot of people and you've got a lot of interesting stories. And she's like, you're very good at talking with people. She's like, I think you really could kind of make this podcast happen. So between her kind of, you know, cheering me on and me fighting this regret of not doing the podcast, those two things really kind of were what led me down the path of creating it, because I looked to see what was out there. And as I mentioned, the two podcasts prior, you know, UP the podcast and also the North Coast Post, they weren't putting out episodes at that time. So at least in that bubble of 2017, it's like there's nobody else doing a UP podcast right now. And if somebody else starts doing it before me, I'm going to sit there and regret not being the one that did it when I've had this idea for so long. So that's really what kind of pushed me to make this podcast a reality.
Since we are getting a little close to time, if you have questions regarding, I mean, this is really the time if you have questions around something you're looking to do and you want to get some experience from someone who may have already done it, now is a good time for that.
Just a quick question, I guess, on the evolution of your podcast, Scott. I am a fan. I've listened to quite a bit of yours, and I love the content. How has that changed maybe from season to season? And have you learned anything about yourself as you've gone through those, maybe struggles or content or creative creation and things of that nature?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, when I started this podcast, we were in a pre-COVID world and I was traveling around the UP, which was awesome. It was a fun way to see the UP because I was reaching out to people. And if they wanted to talk with me, I was hopping in my car and I was, whether I was driving out to the Sioux back-to-back weekends to meet with people or heading up to Houghton or just a lot of different things. It, it that first season, I will admit I was flying by the seat of my pants. I was not planning out a whole season ahead of time and banking episodes, what they call. So you record them all ahead of time and then just put them out as you go. I was just week by week tracking people down and making sure that I was putting out the episode on time. And that's why I initially started doing bi-weekly every 2 weeks. So it gave me time to like catch my breath and actually find people to talk to. Excuse me. The first season, looking back, would I have made it 30 episodes? No, I kind of burnt myself out to the point where at the end of season 1, I wasn't really having fun anymore. Just because I not banking those episodes and then trying to find people that I shouldn't say were worthy of being on the podcast, but finding interesting enough stories that interested me that I wanted to put out there just became a grind. And when you're doing something as a hobby, I'm not generating income from this. I'm not running it like a business. I'm doing it because it's something I'm passionate about and it's just something fun for me. It was like, okay, why am I doing this if I'm not having fun? And I will say that's the hardest part of the podcast is the booking the interviews and getting people to chat with you is hands down the hardest part. Whether getting people to respond to you, I can't tell you how many times I've been ghosted by people that were, yeah, I'll talk with you. And then I try set something up and then it's just radio silence, or just trying to work around people's schedules. It's hard. And when you're doing it as a hobby, it gets to be a little bit thankless. When I finished season 1, I wasn't even really sure there was going to be a season 2. I honestly, I thought, well, if I end it now, at least I ended it on my terms. And then after a few months off, I realized I kind of started to miss it. At least as far as just talking with people, not the, the minutia that I didn't enjoy, but just the talking with people, I missed that. Also, I was getting a lot of positive feedback from people that listen, such as yourself, that were like, hey, I'm all caught up on season 1. When is season 2 going to come out? That type of thing. So with season 2, I really tried to be more strategic as far as banking episodes. I haven't banked a ton in a row, but I've at least banked or tried to bank like maybe 3 or 4 at a time so that I'm not stressing out, and it has helped a lot. But also with COVID hitting, there's been some challenges, but the challenges have been more a conversation you have with somebody in person is much different than it is over a Zoom call. The Zoom calls are great and we're able to converse and there's a connection there, but sitting down with somebody face to face is just a whole nother animal. And so I kind of had to pivot a little bit with that, but it has certainly helped with the mileage on my vehicle and not having to pay for gas and driving all over. It's been a lot easier to kind of chat with people over Zoom. So there's a little bit of a give and take there. But to kind of wrap up my answer to your question, Antonio, of how has it kind of changed me? I feel like it's made me a much better listener to just in my everyday life. To the point where it's been very weird for me to sit here almost for an hour and do the majority of the talking, because I would much rather let somebody else do the talking. I like asking good questions. The best compliment I get from anybody is when I'm interviewing someone and they go, "That's a great question." Like that, I feed off of that. So that's probably my biggest takeaway from this on how it's changed me as a person is really just being better at communicating and just really listening to somebody and not just hearing what they're saying, but really listening to what they have to say and kind of trying to look at things from a different perspective.
That's good. Christina, you're muted. Still
You're on
muted.
mute, Christina. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm calling from my work phone and I forget that it's like separate. So this question is for you, Scott, and I don't really know how to ask it, so I might word it a little oddly. I've never listened to your podcast, so I apologize. I know of it, of course, but I've never really been a podcast person. My husband, James, listens to them. He listens to Howard Stern like every day. And I just can't get into it. Like, and it could be because I'm in the customer service realm and I'm listening to people all day long. Do you have any tips for getting into podcasts?
My biggest piece of advice for trying to get into a podcast would be to try and listen to one with free of distraction.
Okay.
So if you're in customer service like I am, I've been listening to podcasts for so long that I've got no problem pausing and then picking back up after I get a phone call or if I'm doing something that doesn't really affect me. But when I first kind of started on my podcast journey of just listening and absorbing podcasts, I would listen when I would like go for my walks with my dog, because I can kind of, the act of walking, obviously you've got to pay attention to your surroundings and what you're doing, but you can really kind of listen to an episode, depending on the length, you can get a full episode in distraction free. That to me helps a lot. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot of other advice, but just if you can try ever listen in a situation or a scenario, if you're going on a long drive, that's another great one. When I would take trips downstate with my wife to her family and it's like an 8-hour drive, it really makes the drives go by quick when you look at it as, oh, well, it's only like 2 or 3 episodes where you can just listen start to finish. That's another awesome way to get episodes in. When I was still living in Marquette, I would try and listen to episodes on my commute because I was living in Ishpeming and driving into Marquette. That was huge as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
I have a suggestion for you. It's Christy?
Christina.
Christina, I'm sorry. I listen to a lot of podcasts, actually, and what helps is finding a podcast in an area that's of interest to you. So it's much more engaging. So like there's a great podcast out of the Bay Area called Letters and Politics. I mean, there's so many good political podcasts and a lot of alternative news podcasts. Whether you like them or not, Michael Moore has a very interesting podcast as well. So anyway, that's my suggestion.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's a really good point of it's really tough to try and listen to something for an hour if you're not engaged in the subject. I struggle with it too. Like every time I listen to a podcast, my brain just goes to everywhere else and I daydream and then I have to back up 20 minutes to remember what I even listened to. But,
yeah. Subject is key. I mean, and there's podcasts about literally everything under the sun these days. I mean, they say that the podcast world is not oversaturated yet. They're saying that it's still growing, but that just shocks me when I hear that because the amount of different podcasts on different topics is astounding. So if you can find something that you're super into, some people it's true crime, some people it's sports, some people it's paranormal, some people it's comedy, some people it's Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you think of a topic in your head and there's a podcast for it. So if you just find your niche, which that's kind of what I did with this too. Mine is a very niche podcast. If it's just something that you're super into, that helps a lot too, as far as like staying engaged.
We've got time for about one more question. Okay. Scott, real fast. Who's your dream guest?
My dream guest to have on the podcast is Tom Izzo. I'm a big Michigan State basketball fan. And unfortunately, that's one of the episodes or interviews that I had where essentially I got ghosted. I was about this close. If I had more time, I would tell the whole story. But I was speaking with his one of his assistants, and we were, I had met Tom in person, and he had said, "Yeah, we'll make it happen." And it was this close to happening, and then everything just kind of fell apart. So I would love to have him on the podcast, but I don't think it's in the cards, unfortunately, unless I can try and really make something happen. But
Well, never meet your heroes, right?
well, see, the meeting him isn't the disappointing part, because I've met him a handful of times. I've been over to his house for dinner, and he's a fantastic guy, very genuine, just awesome. It's just with his schedule being as busy as it is, obviously sometimes commitments are difficult, and he's probably too nice to not commit to something or to say no to me. He doesn't want to come off like a jerk, but it just makes it tough. So
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you for doing this. We appreciate you. And
yeah.
thank you to everyone who made it today. If you are Eric and Joanne, I don't know if you guys are Connect Marquette members. I know everyone else is. Are you, or you are?
I didn't catch the question. What'd you say?
Are you a Connect Marquette member?
No, I've been to one before a few months back, but I'm not
Okay.
an actual member.
I'm not a member yet. I just relocated to Marquette with
Oh,
my
awesome.
family.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, and I'm here to do professional networking and meet people. And I loved how you talked about the power of networking, Scott. And
Yeah.
yeah, because I'm in a job search right now, and also a search for freelance projects. I'm an organizational communicator who's had a large focus on the nonprofit world, but I'm very open to other avenues where I might use my skills. So sorry for the pitch, but
No, that's great.
Welcome.
Yeah,
but
welcome.
yeah, I love talking to people and meeting people. So yeah, so I'm
Not
very
not
interested.
yet, but so what? Where I'm going with that is this is an ongoing event series we do. This is every month. We're bringing in different guests and different topics. Same format. We have a bunch of other stuff that happens, you know, on a monthly, or we have socials. We've got First Fridays. There are lots of different ways to get involved and meet new people, and thankfully, and what's kind of cool is like I've seen that story happen multiple times of people who've come in and they just meet the right person, or someone knows of something and they connect, and jobs happen, friendships, like all that good stuff. So plug in. It's a great
Yeah.
way to kind of get your feet wet in Marquette County,
And
and you never know what'll happen.
so many people that have a similar story to you, Joanne, of moving back to the area. If you listen to my podcast episodes, there are so many people that I've talked to that are doing awesome stuff that used to live elsewhere and moved back to the UP, and are had to do what you're doing right now, or they're still kind of in in a similar situation as you. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is kind of funny, and we're probably out of time, so I'll make it quick. My husband accepted a position up here. He works in natural resources. He's a plant ecologist. So we actually moved from Miami to Marquette.
Wow.
Anyway, but I'm a Midwesterner.
Hmm.
I was a camp counselor in the UP when I was 18, which I'm very proud of. My brother was a Yooper, so I feel very connected to the area. So,
Awesome.
Well, welcome back, and
Thank you.
everyone for coming. It was great seeing everyone. Thank you.
Hey, RJ.
Yeah.
Real quick to get everybody to participate, I've got to end it how I always do. How do you guys like your pasty? Do you put ketchup on it or put gravy on it? One at a time, you can say how you like your pasty.
Ketchup.
Ketchup?
Mhm.
Honestly, when I eat them, I usually just eat them like as is without
Plain?
anything.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been into the spicy ketchup these days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'd give that a try.
Usually ketchup, because I don't just like have gravy ready, you know?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's not like it'd be weird to just have that in like a condiment thing.
Right.
Go.
Good point.
How about you, Joanne?
It's been quite a few years, so I need to do this again. Anyway, what flavor or what kind of meat do you recommend with a pasty?
There's usually like just beef in there. You can get
Oh.
vegetarian ones if you don't like that, but they typically have beef in there. Some use flank steak, or it's just usually a different variation of beef. But they do have some places I've gotten creative, and there are other options besides that.
Okay, well, we'll have to make that a dinner one night.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well,
There we
thank
go.
you again for inviting me, RJ, and for all of you. The questions were awesome, and I hope that I wasn't boring, and that you at least got something out of it.
No,
right.
thanks, Scott.
Thank you,
It was
everyone.
great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.